By the 1850s, engineers had worked out something specific about the west coast of Ireland. One stretch of it sat closer to New York, by open sea, than any other port the Great Transatlantic lines actually used. Closer than Liverpool, closer than Southampton, closer than Cork. That coastline belonged to Galway. It never became what the map said it should have. The images in this film are AI-assisted reconstructions, attempts to make visible a city that spent a century trying to answer the question of what it was for. Small imperfections may appear, but they let us walk through a Galway that no longer stands. This is the story of a famine that emptied a workhouse faster than graves could be dug for it. A scheme to make Galway the gateway between two continents that was killed by men who had never set foot there. A fishing village older than the city beside it that was pulled down within living memory, and the slower, stranger route by which Galway finally became something new again, a century after it stopped being what it once was. By the 1810s, the wealth that had once run through Galway's tribes was long gone, and the peace that followed the Napoleonic Wars brought its own kind of hardship to the west of Ireland. Prices collapsing, rural households pushed further into poverty. Outside the old walls, the Claddagh, a fishing village older than Galway itself, was at the height of its own separate life. Its people spoke Irish, followed their own customs, and answered to their own elected leader, known as the King of the Claddagh, rather than to the corporation inside the walls. In the years before the 1840s, the Claddagh fleet numbered somewhere around 100 boats, working the bay much as it had for generations. Then came the failure of the potato crop, and with it the Great Famine. Galway's workhouse, built in the early 1840s to hold about 1,000 people, filled far beyond capacity within months. Through 1847 and 1848, roughly 11,000 people died within its walls and its overflow stations, as typhoid, cholera and dysentery spread through a population already starved. In the worst weeks of that first winter, the city was recording 25 to 30 deaths a week from hunger alone, before disease made the toll worse still. For those who survived, the port that had once carried Spanish wine now carried something else. Ships converted in a hurry to take on passengers, packed far past what they were built to hold, bound for Boston, New York and Quebec. Many never survived the crossing. The famine did not simply pass through Galway, it emptied it, and it set the pattern of leaving that would define the city for 100 years afterward. In the middle of that same decade, on the 30th of December 1845, a royal charter established Queen's College Galway, one of 3 new colleges founded across Ireland to offer university education regardless of religion. It opened for teaching 4 years later, in October 1849, with 68 students in a new limestone quadrangle built in a deliberately old style, as if trying to borrow the authority of an institution far older than it actually was. It was an odd thing to be building in the same years the workhouse was overflowing, a bet on Galway's future placed in the middle of its worst crisis. That bet on the future had a second, far larger version. As early as 1830, the Admiralty had identified Galway as a possible site for the main packet station, linking Britain to North America, the fastest sea crossing available anywhere in Europe. The idea waited on 2 things: a railway connecting Galway to the rest of Ireland, and a company willing to run the ships. The railway arrived on the 20th of July 1851. In 1858, a company that took the name the Galway Line was formed to try the second part, and in 1860 its steamers began a regular passenger and mail service between Galway, Newfoundland and Boston. For a short run of years it worked. Real ships sailed a real timetable, 55 successful return crossings between Ireland and North America. Then, in September 1860, the line's flagship, the paddle steamer Connaught, the largest ship afloat apart from the Great Eastern, left Galway on only her second Atlantic crossing carrying nearly 600 people. 100 miles short of Boston, a storm sprang a leak in her hull, and while the crew fought to control it, a fire broke out below deck. Every single person aboard was taken off safely onto a passing ship before the Connaught burned to the waterline and sank. A genuine feat of seamanship that saved every life. It did not save the company. Combined with a string of earlier accidents among its other vessels, the loss of the Connaught turned government and public confidence against the whole venture. The Galway Line lost its mail contract the following year, struggled on for a few more and was finished by 1864. Galway had been broken once before by an enemy that came from outside its walls. This time it was not an army but a fire at sea 100 miles from land, and the effect on the city's prospects was, in its own quieter way, just as final. Through the rest of the 19th century and into the 20th, Galway settled into being a modest provincial city. Its harbour ambitions unrealised, its population far smaller than it had been at its medieval height. The Claddagh endured longest as a world apart, its thatched cottages and its own customs surviving well into the new century, and old Galway persisting stubbornly beside the new one. That endurance ended abruptly. In 1927, an outbreak of tuberculosis spread through the crowded village, and the local authorities declared it a health hazard. Over the years that followed, the cottages were condemned and cleared. Families were housed in new council housing built nearby, whether they wished to move or not. The last of the old thatched cottages was pulled down in 1934. The ring that carried the village's name outlived it by centuries. A piece of jewellery known and worn around the world long after the place that gave it its name had been demolished. For decades after, there was little reason to expect anything else from Galway. The university grew slowly, absorbed in 1908 into the new National University of Ireland under the name it still carries today. The port that had once dreamed of America handled fishing boats and small coastal trade instead. It was not commerce or empire that eventually gave the city a new reason to exist, but something closer to what had first made it distinctive 400 years earlier: a willingness to bring the outside world in. In 1978, a student art society at the university, working with a handful of local artists and activists, staged a week of readings, film screenings and theatre under the banner of a new arts festival. The first programme included readings from writers who would go on to national reputations, a locally made film and puppet theatre performed in whatever halls could be found. It was modest, funded on little more than a small arts council grant and considerable nerve. It did not stay modest. Over the following decades, it grew into one of Europe's significant international arts festivals, drawing performers and audiences from across the world into a city that, for most of the previous century, had struggled to draw anyone in at all. That reinvention reached its clearest official recognition in 2020, when Galway held the title of European Capital of Culture, built around themes of migration, landscape and language, themes that could hardly have been chosen more precisely for a city whose whole modern history had been shaped by people leaving it, and by a landscape that had once promised, and then failed to deliver, a route to the wider world. The year did not go as planned. A pandemic emptied the streets the celebration was meant to fill. Even so, the city kept a foothold on the culture it had spent 40 years building, and the title stood as recognition of something real underneath the disruption. Today, Galway's population stands at just under 86,000, still a small city by any European standard, and yet one that has built an outsized reputation as Ireland's cultural and creative capital. Its narrow streets filled each summer with festival crowds where merchant ships once unloaded Spanish wine, and where a fishing village once stood entirely apart from the city that grew up beside it. It took the best part of 2 centuries, a famine that nearly emptied it, a transatlantic line that sailed for 6 years and burned in the middle of the ocean, and the slow demolition of the oldest part of itself, before Galway finally found a version of the openness to the world that had once made it rich. Built this time not on trade routes or shipping contracts, but on the simple, repeatable act of inviting people in.